Introducing the panelists, first we have our first panelist. We'd like to welcome Judge Lejeune Lang. Renowned leader and trailblazer Lejeune Lang has served as a paramount example of how we can rise to become global change agents. Endowed with a passion to serve in her community and to be a global advocate of systemic justice or systemic change, her life's journey has led her to many great accomplishments and has given her a platform to make tremendous impact in each arena she's encountered. Throughout her career, Judge Lejeune Lang has demonstrated her commitment to serving in the community, promoting equity, and administering justice through the law. Working for the advancements of our community, she has served on the Minnesota Supreme Court Task Force for Gender Fairness in the courts, as well as the co-vice chair of the Minnesota Supreme Court Racial Bias Task Force. Moreover, her remarkable advocacy skills has made her a front runner for the organizations like the United Nations World Conference on Race and the National Bar Association. In addition, she serves as the honorary consul for South Africa, representing South Africans in Minnesota and fostering partnerships and economic development. Pointedly, the evidence of her influence can be seen in the changes that have increased access to justice for women lawyers and litigants and racial minorities. All in all, in addition to advising world leaders in political matters, Lang works as an international aid for women in other countries dealing with unjust laws on female inheritance and domestic violence. Next, I will introduce our next panelist, Kevin Reese. Kevin Reese is a key leader in the Twin Cities community, serving and utilizing his platform to make effective change. After his encounter with the judicial system, his eyes were opened to the inadequacies and injustice that permeate the system. As a result, his life's mission is to rectify the detrimental effects of mass incarceration. One of the main ways he accomplishes this is by serving as a prison justice organizer at Voices for Racial Justice. Gifted with the talents of influential authorship and writing, he became a recipient winner of the 2018 AWP Intro Journals Project for Poetry published in the Hayden Ferry Review. Additionally, his writing talents have also been featured in Emily Baxter's nationally acclaimed book, We Are All Criminals, and he maintains his own column in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. Ultimately, his writing centralizes on the topics of humanity, organizing, transformative movements, and ancestral visionary poetry. And now our final panelist, Dr. Artika Tyner. Dr. Tyner is a transformational leader whose passions have driven her to challenge systems of inequity for the sake of the community. As an educator, author, and highly acclaimed speaker, she has not only sparked hope in the lives of countless people across the globe, but also inspires students to serve as social engineers who create new inroads to justice and freedom. Beginning her advocacy journey in law school, she now spearheads her own nonprofit organization, Planting People and Growing Justice, which is committed to exposing the community to leadership development training, educationally empowering materials, and the responsibilities of civic engagement. From facilitating policy campaigns to developing social entrepreneurial initiatives, Dr. Tyner raises the bar with each new accomplishment, yet never forgets the imperativeness of providing a ladder for others to use to reach their optimal potential. All in all, she serves as a global citizen by providing a bridge for communities like Ghana, by advancing educational attainment and entrepreneurial skills in order to inspire the next generation of leaders.
Thank you, Majesty Phillips, for that warm introduction. I would give you a virtual round of applause. Majesty is serving as our 2020 summer intern at Planting People, Growing Justice. So we're grateful, and we know that it's of critical importance that we train and inspire the next generation of leaders. So kudos to you, Majesty, and thank you. And we also look forward to seeing you reach your dream of becoming an attorney. So for today, our topic is Be a Leader. And we'll be looking at two areas and specifically where you can lead. The first one related to the census and being counted. And the second one is related to lifting your voice through the ballot box for voting. So we'll start and we'll divide the conversation into two parts. And the first one will begin with the US Census. So when we think about the census, we know the importance of being counted. We hear the message and it's all over social media as a hashtag, but what does it really mean of being counted in our community? So being counted and related to the census is a connection to valuable resources, whether it's money for our local schools, healthcare systems, or even for our local fire departments. It also helps to fund programs like Medicaid, programs like SNAP for food assistance, Section 8, and our school lunch program. So we know that the census numbers are critical to ensuring that we have vibrant and sustainable communities. In addition to that, it also helps to determine how many representatives each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives. So I just want to bring just a couple key facts related to the census to help ground us, since this partnership for this community town hall forum is in partnership with Ramsey County. And here's some things that we just want to think about locally here in the state of Minnesota. Who's likely to be missed in the census count? The first group is children ages 0 to 4. If they're not accounted for, that's 350,000 children who will be undercounted. Renters, that's a population of about 1.3 million. Racial and ethnic minority groups or diverse communities, that's a risk of being undercounted by 1 million people. People experiencing homelessness, that's another 10,000 people. Undocumented immigrants, that's another 80,000 folks, and also another group of non-English speakers. So that's another 233,000 people. So why am I starting with this data? Because if Minnesota, as it relates to our own history and our own resources related to the census, if we're not counted and if we're undercounted, this is something that will impact our entire community. So with that, I'm going to turn to Judge Lang to look at the history of the census and why the census is important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyner. The information you provided about who is likely to be undercounted is important in terms of understanding the history of the census. While the US Census was designated by the Constitution as a tool to count the population, it has always been implemented in the context of white supremacy, to suppress our identity, to suppress our voice, and to suppress our narrative. In the very first census of 1790, the enumerators listed free white males, free white females, and then the third category was all other free persons. We were not expressly intended to be identified as free African descendant people in the census, even though we existed as free African descendant people. We were listed as all other free persons. From 1790 to 1840, slaves were counted only as a listing, as a number next to the owner. No name, no identity was recorded for our existence. We were still counted as 3/5 other persons, but we still did not matter in terms of having that individual identity. In later census, including the notation of a change in 1820, all other free persons was changed to free colored males and females. And then by 1850, a mulatto category was added at the request of a white slave owner in Alabama. We had from 1850 and 1860 a census which named the free members of households, white and non-white, by age, place of birth, sex, color of each free person in the household. And then from 1850 to 1860, we also had a slave schedule, which listed persons who were counted as slaves by a number. So slaves were enumerated on a separate schedule. No names were recorded. Enumerators were instructed to substitute numbers instead of names on the schedule, and they were arranged by state, then by county, then by owner, and recorded, the enumerators recorded the number of slaves that were owned, their color, Black or mulatto, sex, age, and then disability, whether the slave was deaf, in the term of 1850, dumb, blind, insane, idiotic, the number of fugitive slaves from the state, and the number manumitted. So there was no index for this slave schedule. So this was just for those who had an interest in keeping these records, but for those who want to go back and look at them, there's not an index in terms of linking people with the owners. The first census in 1870 after the Civil War included the names of African Americans along with the rest of the population, listing also age, place of birth, first official record of the surname of an African descendant person. In 1880, family relationships were included for each household. So we have gone from 1870 to 1930, and along the way, there were efforts to, including 1890, to put quadroon, octroon into the census. And we all know that in 1896, we had Plessy versus Ferguson, which enforced racial segregation in the United States and white supremacy with the one-drop rule. And the quadroon and the octroon persisted until 1930, and then replaced with the word Negro with a capital N. So I think we have had a number of ways to either document us or identify us for means of repression, but not for representation. Thank you.
That's excellent, Judge Lang. Having that history, we really appreciate it. Majesty, would you please let the rest of the folks in as a part of the participants, please? And so one of the things that we're excited to know is that people like you, Judge Lang, are connecting the history, connecting us to the present. So that brings us to a perfect bridge to you, Brother Kevin. Give us that sense. We hear about it as slavery by another name. How does this connect the history that Judge Lang just provided to current and contemporary issues?
Something she said to me like made me pick up my pen and stop me in my tracks, that when slaves were not counted, where they were just listed next to the owner as a number, for me, like with my experience with the criminal justice system, that felt so familiar. That for the 15 years that I was inside of Minnesota correctional facilities, whether I was in Stillwater, Faribault, Lino Lakes, St. Cloud, in the 2010 census, like I was counted like as a number, right? I was state property of the state, and I was accounted as a number out there in those municipalities. Not in the community that I come from. Not that these resources was not going to the north side where I came from, where my son goes to school, where he's a part of that school district. My family drive down these streets. Like I was not counted there. I was counted in this rural community that when I left prison, they probably wouldn't even accepted me in their gas station. So when I heard that, I heard the similarity of, wow, even now in 2020, people are still being counted next to people that they consider owners. Because when you go to prison, they sentence you to the custody of the commissioner, which means you are state property. That's what it says, state property. And because you are state property, they are able to count you in any way that you can, any way that they like. And this is still going on today. And this is gerrymandering, right? So gerrymandering is something that like impacts the community in a way in which we fight so much. And it's one of those, because it only comes around every 10 years, right? So it's easy for us to maybe forget about it or not be engaged in it as possible, or understand how this impacts our children. So for me, when I learned about gerrymandering, it made mass incarceration make a little bit more sense. And what I mean by that, it was a direct connection to people's self-interest. Like, oh no, it is the self-interest of these cities to have these prisons in these cities that's outside of these communities. And it's their self-interest to keep these places as full as they possibly can. When we know most of the people in prison is not in no prison in their community. If you go to Minneapolis, I don't think it's a prison, maybe 60 miles, close to Minneapolis in that way. All of the prisons is outside of the community in which Black and brown and BIPOC communities come from. In the census, they are counting them there. So it's multifaceted. You are not being counted in your community. So the resources is not going there, so that's less. And you are being counted in these communities that the prison is in, and the resources is going there. So the poor is getting poor, the rich is getting richer, and the wealth gap is continuing to like widening. Representation. In 2010, the North Side lost representation. There was over 7,000 people who wasn't counted in 2010. Now, I was in prison. I think I know where about 2,500 of them was at, right? These people that from North Minneapolis who were not counted, these missing seats at these tables who wasn't counted, they were sitting inside of Minnesota correctional facilities. And guess what? All of those resources went to those cities. And the North Side lost over $100 million, over $100 million in resources. Anyone from Minneapolis, could you imagine from 2010 to 2020, what $100 million could have did in North Minneapolis? So in that is where we have seen a lot of the trauma that has taken place. It comes from poverty. It comes from people saying, hold on, it feels like something's missing. It feels like resources is missing. It feels like something is not right. And one of the ways in which they continue to enact that is through people not being counted in the census. And there is not the representation that we knew. And we lost representation in Minneapolis and North Minneapolis as well too, because there was missing seats. So the census is something that absolutely drives mass incarceration in 2020 and is directly connected to the self-interest of these small cities that inhabit these prisons to make sure that they are able to count these bodies that they've kidnapped. I want to be really clear about that. That's what it feels like when you go to prison. You are taken against your will at gunpoint to a place outside of your home, outside of your community, to another place. And you are held in this place with the threat of violence, right? So prison might, we may forget that, but prison is only there. It's only able to exist because under that, there is a threat of violence, right? So in 2020, I'm excited to see what it would look like for us to begin to think about what we're going to do to change this in 2030. So this don't continue to happen inside of our communities, but gerrymandering and mass incarceration.
What's the sense for the listening audience? And please, there are still more people coming in. We'll welcome them in, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here with us today for this important conversation. Brother Kevin, give us a sense of, you use two terms of art. Now, I'm familiar with it. Tell me more about this idea of mass incarceration and gerrymandering. How would you tell someone and tell them about and explain if they've never heard of either one? So can you give us just some examples of what that means in context?
So what that means is gerrymandering means that when the census comes around, right, every 10 years. So if you are me, I was from Minneapolis. I went to prison in 2005. So in 2010, I was in Stillwater prison. And when the census came around, I was not counted in the Minneapolis community, in the Minneapolis home that I came from. I was counted in Stillwater. So what that means is all of the resources that were supposed to go to the community for my body, for my existence being in that way, went to Washington County, went to Stillwater, right? And this is the practice of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when these small cities that inhabit these prisons are counting the bodies inside of the prison as a part of the population of the city. And these people that have never touched the city, they went straight to a prison in shackles. They are there in shackles, and they are being counted in the census as residents of those communities. And all of the resources is going to those communities on their behalf. And none of those resources is trickling back down to anyone in the prison. And this is what gerrymandering is. These communities is getting resources for our bodies.
Thank you. Thank you for providing that context. And just to look at America a little more critically in the dimensions of mass incarceration, we have about 5% of the world's population and nearly a quarter of the world's prison population. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, which provides a context for this. Part of her research was able to highlight that there were more African-American males under the control of the penal system at the peak of the war on drugs and still yet today than who were enslaved in the 1800s. So we know that there is a reality of racial inequities, racial injustice that's embedded in some of these systems as well. I now want to turn to Judge Lang. So in light of this history that you so eloquently provided for us, give us a sense, Judge Lang, of why then does the census matter today? How does the past impact the present, and what should we be thinking about? And I'll make it personal for a moment. I went out and I was talking to many of my relatives, and I told them about working to support the census, and I was trying to raise awareness. And the response was like, that has nothing to do with me, thank you. What does that have to do with me? So give us a sense of why this is important, Judge Lang.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Kevin for those details that he provided about the prison system. In the Minnesota Constitution and the US Constitution, we still have a slavery exception. And so you can be treated as only a number and described as a slave under both constitutions because the penal system is an exception to slavery. And so with that legal authority, you can deprive someone of the opportunity to be counted in their own community and be counted by the so-called custodian, the Commissioner of Corrections. So it was a hard-fought battle in Minnesota by Stillwater to be designated the penal institution and the location of the first prison. There was a fight for the capital, a harder fight to be the prison because they knew the resources that would come with being the location of the prison. So what has happened is in Minnesota, we have consistently been in the top 3 or the top 5 in the nation for incarceration of African descendant people. Even though we worked hard on racial bias, the default position of our state is to keep incarcerating African descendant people. And one of those areas that I'm sure Kevin and many others are working on is this incarceration of people who are on probation for technical violations and they haven't committed a new crime. So there's always this trap door to incarcerate people, and only wealthy people like Mr. Cohen, who represented Mr. Trump, could get out of a pretextual incarceration. But this happens every day, time after time, to African descendant people, that they are reincarcerated for no valid reason and held without a hearing, without bail. And so there's a system that keeps trying to dispossess, even though they work their way out of prison, to send them back. When you mentioned your family, one example when we were looking at the census that happened in North Minneapolis is that under our present census policy, if there is an undercount and you can't get hold of a person in a particular location, the landlord can provide the counts for the census. But if that is not done, but there is a nearby opportunistic landlord, like in the Loop in Minneapolis, a landlord who owns 8,000 units, that landlord can send that data to the census and pull the resources to the North Loop away from the central north side of Minneapolis. So those kind of things happen, and so all of a sudden you have a population density that's recorded in the census that is skewed. And so we're in that situation right now where if people aren't reached by the census, aren't able to communicate, you know, we have a pandemic, we have access to internet issues. There's a lot of reasons people wouldn't complete the census. But if the landlords are not supplying that information, then we again will have that skewed result.
Thank you, Judge Lang. That's very helpful. So we want to make sure that we're putting the encouragement for the landlords to ensure that we're accurately accounting for people in the community. This takes me to you, Brother Kevin. So why do you believe, as a part of what's happening, I gave the just personal example, what's the source of some of the negative perceptions related to the census, and how can we then as leaders use our platform to rectify the perceptions and promote engagement?
It's rooted in historical trauma. Like, our communities don't trust giving their information to the government, right? They don't trust, like, when someone's coming to your door and say, tell me how many people is in your house. Like, historically, our people have, like, we don't know. So, and a lot of our community is misinformed and don't understand fully how the census, operates. And again, because it only comes around every 10 years. So, like, each generation almost have to, like, every time the census comes around, each generation have to organize all over again to inform the generation over, like, why this matters. And I know personally, it's rooted in white supremacy. It's rooted in, okay, why should I give my information to you, and how does this impact me positively on a day-to-day, right? Because people don't have enough space to even understand how this impacts the whole, because people are, like, struggling day to day. And, like, filling out this form for the census, it feels like you are doing something to support the government or to support the U.S. People don't, like, why should we trust? So it's rooted in historical trauma, white supremacy, and just complete mistrust between our community and the government, period. And it's like, what Judge Lang was just saying, it's absolutely true. When our community know that we are away from being a slave, like, we are one, what they call a felon or anything away from being a slave again. So why should we trust the same people with all of our information and who lives in our home? And it's almost like our community is very much, the history of slavery still exists, where our families are always tattered together. So ain't no telling who in my house, right? You go to grandma and them house, auntie house, ain't no telling who in our house. I know my grandma, when we grew up, don't answer the door for them people. She don't know who he is. She ain't no telling, like, ain't no, somebody might got a warrant. Somebody may be getting looked for. Ain't no telling what's going on. So the community, like, has mistrust for the government, and they are misinformed. And it's not enough spaces where people actually trust the actual community leaders to be able to inform them. And I think the way that we do this is through good old fashioned relational organizing, right? I can hear it different from someone that I know and I trust from the community, why the census matters, versus someone coming to the door who maybe be from outside of the community, coming to us, asking us to extract information. The community feel like the government has extracted enough from us. So what needs to happen is it needs to be relational organizing within the community, informing the community. It has to be us, by us, by us, just like everything else.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Kevin. And I really like that. It should be a good hashtag, us, by us, for us, in the sense
Right.
of looking at the everyday interactions. Hence why I didn't start with a broad audience. I started immediately with my own family, because that's one of the things, if we can start within our own social networks to even introduce the idea of the census, we can help build momentum. Judge Lang, what are some of the strategies that you think can be used to help overcome some of these negative perceptions, as Brother Kevin talked about, and how can we help to rectify it as leaders, some of the perceptions?
Well, I think one important thing is to understand that only one person in the household has to complete the census. So letting the community know it's not going to, everybody in the house does not have to fill out a form. Sometimes people feel that they're identified in that way. We had hoped that we would use the public library as a resource for people who were homeless to be able to do the census out of the public library. There needs to be some community spaces opened up in lieu of the library for people to be able to fill out their census online and be able to simplify the process and understand that our elected officials, who are now gaining momentum in the House of Representatives and hopefully in the Senate, we need those numbers of the census to keep building our people of color and African descendant people in those bodies. So as someone who I won't name once said, you're either at the table or you're on the menu.
I know that's right.
So we need to be able to chart the future of our own community, state by state, person by person, and the nation.
Thank you, Judge Lang. That's an important piece. We want to make sure that we're helping to select the menu, redefine it, reshape it, and bring a little soul to it. So
season the food too.
So we are excited for that imagery, to think about how strategic we can be and how it really would be an opportunity. I know, Brother Kevin, you said season the food. I think that seasoning is really about that premise that we all talk about, inclusion.
Yeah.
If we talk about those words of equity and inclusion, that's what it's all about, being those cultural brokers, bringing people together in a strategic way to be a part of this piece that we're envisioning and building still yet today. Because remember, Langston Hughes said, America is still yet being built. It's not America to me yet. So how do we then engage strategically on making sure that we're bringing people together, getting them involved, sharing information, and make sure they're counted? So just another question, please, for those who are attending and participating, please add any questions that you have in the chat. We welcome any questions to continue the engagement, and thank you again for joining us. We're happy that you're here with us today. We know that this is a critical conversation for the entire community. Now, here's a data point that I just want to share, and I'm going to ask it then as a follow-up question for our panelists. What can we do as a result of this data point? It's believed and based upon the research of the census that 17.7% of Minnesotans will not self-respond without additional follow-up. Both Judge Lang and Brother Kevin started to give us some ways, but what are some of the best practices? We have, everyday people on the call joining in with us today for the webinar. What are some of the strategies that we can use, knowing that's nearly a quarter of people who will not complete their census without some additional follow-up? What can we do to get more people involved in the census process?
I think first is like relational organizing, to just sit down and write a list. Go on your phone contacts, go through your phone contacts and write a list and just begin texting people, following up with them and having a real conversation with them around, hey, did you do the census? They say yes, kudos. And if no, then you engage them. Why not? And this is going to be a teaching moment. You may be going to learn something too. You may be going to learn something new, but you will also have an opportunity to inform them how we can leverage this as power to continue to have a positive impact on our community. And if they're in your phone log, hopefully these are people that trust you and know you, and they are able to hear it from you differently than they would hear it from maybe some advertisement on TV or coming from information outside of the community, right? It feels different when it comes from a loved one, a friend, someone who you trust, someone who has skin in the game just as you, and say, no, this impacts us. And if we do this, we can leverage power and make a difference in this place, in this place, and in this place. So I think for all of the everyday folks, holler at your folks, holler at them, use whatever language you know that they will understand, right? Because our language is really important like that. And do all that you can to give them all of the information that you have, why this matters, right? And maybe promise them peach cobbler or something, if that's what it takes. We need them to get counted. But it starts right in your contact list. Just hit everybody up and talk to them.
That's excellent. I appreciate that, Brother Kevin. Sometimes it feels so distant and we don't know where to start. You reminded us to start where we are, right on our contact list. Judge Lang, what do you recommend?
I recommend that people have announcements through the church, whether it's on the YouTube service or any other way that they're having church service, that our radio stations like KMOJ and this new Black network provide more information about the importance of the census. I think Facebook is a traditional way too to be able to talk about participation, because it's about the piece of the pie. In Minnesota, a number of different programs and funding is based on your percentage of the population. And if we're consistently undercounted, it's hard for us to go and say that we should get more economic development money into our community, more arts funding into our community, more zoos and other beneficial stores and other development in our community when we're undercounted. And so the mosques, the temples, the storefronts, the cup foods, everywhere there should be information about the census and a positive message that you want the community to get their piece of the pie, whether that pie be sweet potato or peach cobbler. We want to get our full share.
I love African descended people.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Judge Lang. So Judge Lang's given us a very clear message that it must be everywhere. That brings it to that point in the name of Miss Mary Kay Boyd's organization. Everybody's in. So this is an opportunity for everyone to play a key role related to the census and being counted. Once again, just a reminder, feel free to add any questions or comments that you have right in the chat. We look forward to hearing from you and hearing some of your ideas. Please share some ideas in the chat box as well. Tell us what you're doing to be a leader, to share information about the census and some of the strategies that you will use.
And I'd like to encourage any of our artist friends who may be here to the power of art, right? How art is one of the ways in which we've communicated for centuries. So like any of our artist friends, use your artistic expression to also talk about it, because it's another language. You will reach people that may not hear it from their contact list. They may not hear it from Cup Foods, but if you put it in some art, maybe that may be the thing that speaks to their spirit. It needs to be everywhere. So artist friends, put on for the city too.
We appreciate the reminder. Through the arts, we get that message out there and reach audiences that we may not traditionally reach. So thank you. That's what looks like a call to action from Brother Kevin to say, it's you. Look in the mirror and we can make this happen together. Yes. As we transition, we have one question here. It's come in our chat box. It says, can those with felonies fill out the census?
Yes, absolutely.
That's your home. Yes, get counted.
So it's for everyone. A part of what, and this will be my series of next follow-up questions on this portion related to census before we start talking about voting. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions. Most recently, I saw in the media, part of the piece was, if you're undocumented, then you're not able to complete the census. If you don't have proper citizenship, census is for everyone, and we'll make that distinction as we start to go into voting, but this is for everyone. And to the question that we got in the chat box about whether or not felons can vote and folks who have a felony record, and I'll clarify and I'll fix my own language. I will say those who have a felony record versus felons as a plural, because that's not anyone's identity. They still have identity of brother, sister. And so I just want to make sure, and a part of this is getting our language correct. It's essential to have our language be as inclusive, powerful, and empowering and uplifting as we can be. So I'm duly amended on that one. But a part of what we want to make sure is that we help to dispel the myths and address a lot of the miscommunication. So the point that Brother Kevin clarified earlier on was that the fact that for our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, they're not able to fill out the census. And Judge Lang helped us understand that history about how those funds are then brought into some of the rural communities where the prisons are located. But if someone's at home, and Minnesota's a bit of a mystery related to this, and I have to take this point to clarify it because I had a call with Senator Klobuchar's office about this. Minnesota, based upon our data, if we're not careful, we'll get confused. We have a high rate of felony convictions, but that does not necessarily equate to folks being in secure detention. Many folks are at home on probation and parole and may not have gone to prison. So part of what makes it challenging for Minnesota and that scarlet letter of quote unquote felon is that people are still home and experiencing some of the challenges associated with felon disenfranchisement, whether it's related to their voting rights in Minnesota or licensure. So that's a whole separate lecture, but I just want to make sure that we're very clear that if someone's at home, they can be counted for, and we still need to do some work here. So this is your call to action. Call your elected official. Here's your moment to say that they also should be able to vote.
Say it.
Judge Lang, Brother Kevin, is there anything else you want to add to that?
For sure. When the word felon, right, it's code word, Judge Lang just talked about, is code word for slave, right? It's to take away some of your rights, and one of the rights is your rights to vote, right? you have no right to vote. But you have the right to still be counted in your home, wherever you live, if you are sitting on your couch. The way they enact that is for our brothers and sisters who they still have in physical custody inside of the correctional facilities, right, property. And that's also one of the reasons why we see a lot of disengagement, because a lot of people that I know who have been branded felon, right, I don't have a vote. They just completely politically disengaged. The process is not for me. The process is something that happens to me. I don't have no power in this. Like, the system is kind of made to make you think that, because it has taken away so many of your rights. It went all the way down into just the actual job and career that you can have. There is a list of things that you just can't do any longer when you're a felon. And this is a part of like the disenfranchisement like of our community. So yes, Minnesota, we need to get to it, and we need to restore the right for people to vote. I pay taxes, y'all. Like, I came home, right now, I'm expected to acquiesce to all of the conditions of society, but on the day, I don't have a voice to cast my ballot. And for sure, I'm on the front lines to do whatever I could do to make sure that me and all of the brothers and sisters who have been impacted by that system have a voice on those days at the ballot.
Thank you so much, Brother Kevin. I think this is a moment where I also have to talk about your t-shirt. We all can't see it from where you're seated, but tell us a message on your t-shirt and why it's important. So
my t-shirt says, "Until we are all free." It's important, again, Michelle Alexander, I'm reading the book Back in Prison. It's in the last chapter from, it's a James Baldwin quote. I read it from The Fire Next Time. And she ends the book with that, what James Baldwin said: "We can't be free until we are all free." Thank you and Godspeed. I remember reading it and dropping the book. After I read it, because in that chapter, Michelle Alexander goes on to talk about a generation of people who was going to know nothing else except prison. And she was saying that this generation of people were going to be the voices who was going to lead the fight to end mass incarceration. So me being someone who had been in prison 8 years at that time, since I was 8 years old, she was talking directly to me. And I've been working ever since doing this. So what Until We Are All Free is a platform for those people, because I'm just one Kevin. I sat in prison with so many amazing, remarkable spirits who had so much talent and so much to give to the community, but they are in prison. So what Until We Are All Free is signifying that there's a generation, mass incarceration has impacted a generation of our community. And I come from that generation. And what I want to do is create platforms for everyone to have an opportunity to go against what I just said earlier, where this list of all the things you can't be, we're going to completely transform those things and have the opportunity to come home and transform and be the full versions of ourselves. And that's what I do. And I left prison a year ago after 15 years, and I love so many people that I love, right? So this is something that I remind myself every day. Until we are all free, I'm not free as well. I have brothers and sisters and people that I care about. Right now, in this state, in this country, there's some 25-year-old kid who's sitting in prison. Right? What about him? Well, right? What about, there's a sister who I know here who I work with, Antoinette Johnson. This sister got life without parole in Shakopee Correctional Facility, a Black woman, a mother of four, for a murder that she didn't commit, felony murder. It's known she didn't pull the trigger. She was there with her boyfriend. They gave this sister life. And that's what Until We Are All Free is, to create a platform to make sure that that generation of people is not forgotten. While we are working to abolish and reform whatever side of the token that you're on, the criminal justice system, we cannot forget the generation of people who are currently sleeping in those cells. And we lost enough generations. And Until We All Free, gonna make sure that we don't forget about the one who they still have captive.
We appreciate the reminder. And if somebody wants more information about you and the work that you do, how could they get more involved?
I'm gonna put my email in the chat. You can just email me at kevin@uwaaf.com. Email me. We can figure something out, connect, contact, or you can just hit me up on uwaaf.com. Send me a message and we can connect. And I'm gonna put it in the chat right now.
Thank you, Brother Kevin. Judge Lang, the chat's gotten lively. We have a lot of questions here. I'm going to turn this one to you. This one is a question. It says, do the panelists think there are other vivid ways to get messages out, written or verbal, to the community of what will be lost, things that we take for granted? So I know you listed some of the things, whether it's related to zoos or fire departments, recreational or educational pieces, from not being counted. So they're asking, how do we kind of change this and have it as an inverse of the message to inspire?
Well, we have to see ourselves as positive, and we have been contributing to this state since it was formed and even before. And so our numbers need to represent all of us so that we can continue to get credit for existing, rather than the default position of the census of making us invisible. I think one of the things that's so important is for our community, as Kevin said, to be inclusive of everyone. The people who are invisible, the people who are incarcerated, they're part of our community, and we need to work on their behalf as well. As the president of the International Leadership Institute, we went down to meet with African descendant people in Brazil. And we went to this location where, because the slave trade sent us to South America just as they sent us to North America. But we went to this location where they had memorialized a rescue of slaves from a slave ship by formerly enslaved people. So this slave ship had run aground, and the white slave owners just abandoned us as we are cargo that we're worth more for insurance than our lives. So these chained up slaves were abandoned in the ocean, all chained together. And what happened with the freed slaves on the shore of Brazil is that they formed a human chain to rescue their brothers and sisters in chains in the ocean and pull this huge chain of people out of the ocean to save their lives. And then they recorded that event for posterity and formed a samba club to celebrate and commemorate that rescue. So we have to form a chain to rescue our brothers and sisters who are in chains, whether they're incarcerated or just out of the institution with nowhere to live or a job. We have to teach our brothers and sisters that if the job place says no, we have to help them form their own business, because you can be a convicted felon and run your own business. So we have to help people do those things and show them that they matter and help them fill these forms out, because we have to keep bending that tree that doesn't want to include us so that we can have the fruit from that tree.
Thank you, Judge Lang. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Judge Lang. I'm taking notes from both you and Brother
sure.
Kevin, and it stood out to me that we'll no longer be invisible. So that's really that call to action, but also the accountability for each and every one of us.
Yeah.
We have another question here, Brother Kevin. I'll let you lead on this one because you alluded to it before. It says, how do we ease the worries of those, for whatever reason, may not want the government or authorities to know who is living with them?
But just know that your information through the census is federally protected, right? That it's federally protected. If your information is leaked in some kind of way, that there is like federal laws against them sharing any of your information in that way. First thing. And the next thing is be as informed as you possibly can and talk to them about the options that we have. Either we don't get these resources, then this continues to negatively impact our community, or we can inform ourselves, be brave, and it's not just being counted, because it can't stop there. It can't just be being counted and it stop there. No. You have to be counted and then get active to make sure that justice is enacted, right? So you tell them, like, so even if you're counted, you still have the power to make sure that you are active in your community in every day and in every way, and standing in these gaps and making sure that what needs to happen happens. So activate yourself. Activate yourself.
We have to say it one more time. Get counted and then get active. As a
Yes.
reminder, get
Yes.
counted and then get active. Our next question here, and I'll bring this one to you, Judge Lang, is, are there any ways in which white allies can help?
Yes, we need those technology centers so that people can fill out the census online. So white allies can use their office space or contribute technology to a location so that the census can be completed. We also, as you mentioned, the courts are on Zoom. So people don't have access to the courts if they don't have the high enough internet to use a Zoom system. So allies can help create these technology centers at the Urban League, other locations, so that the community has access while the libraries are closed to be able to fill the census out.
So here's a reminder for allies, you can help to create those spaces, join in, elevate, raise awareness. But I want to give a challenge too. I'm working on a particular research piece, and you can tell by now I was an English major and studying the humanities, so every word counts. I challenge us to also even think about the word ally. Is there a word that is more inclusive and more bound to the piece that Brother Kevin talked about getting active? And I believe that word, and it came to me as one of those epiphanies when I was visiting Frederick Douglass's home in Washington, D.C., the word abolitionist. Because being an ally can be very situational, to say, I give you a part of my privilege, a part of my power to accomplish this thing. Let's put in the context of the census. Maybe I do give you the office space, and maybe I do support you. But the idea is that I also have to be very comfortable in myself and understand that in order to be an ally, my next phase must not be staying as an ally. It must be becoming an abolitionist for justice. By definition, if you don't believe me, the two words are starkly different. Ally is very situational. Abolitionist is about what? Changing and transforming systems. That way, 10 years out, I own some of the spaces and I can help join in with you to be that abolitionist for justice. So challenge some friends, think about it. You don't have to say you agree with Dr. Tyner's definition. Pull out your handy dandy dictionary and you will see that the words are starkly different. So what I've been challenging all of my friends, including myself as well, is to think about how we can transcend from allyship to being an abolitionist for justice, transforming the very system. So 10 years out, I'm not calling Judge Lang, Brother Kevin, and bringing Majesty back in to introduce us all to have the same conversation, that we're committed to systems change and it's long term. But an excellent question. I think it's very powerful to have all of our white allies, all of our allies coming together, no matter your nation, creed, religion, that we're all working together. But let's think about allyship 2.0. And it's being an abolitionist.
I love it. Thanks, Dr. Tyner.
Part of the solution.
Yes, yes.
The real part.
Get active. You have to be active.
All right, so let's talk about another way to be active then, voting. So let's look at a little bit, I think context matters. So Judge Lang, help us to think about voting as it relates to history. I know voting all of a sudden, of course, has been a hot topic as we think about our messenger and our champion, Congressman John Lewis, going home. We know that he was a champion for voting rights and access to the ballot box. What does voting really mean to us beyond, 2020? We'll see all the signs out in the yards. From historical context, why is voting significant?
Black people hold the keys to the kingdom for voting. So in 1948, when Hubert Humphrey at the Democratic Convention asked for the states to move from states' rights to human rights and stop the formal white supremacy that was keeping Blacks out of the political process, the white Southerners got up and basically left the Democratic Party and moved to be Republican. But there was a man who was running for president by the name of Harry Truman. And everybody thought because he stood to include Black people that he would lose the election. So they even printed newspapers saying Dewey won the election. but the people who won the election for Harry Truman were urban Black people who organized across the nation and shocked the socks off the South. And ever since that happened, the South has known that Black people can decide any election in the United States, and voter suppression, not only from the Reconstruction era, but from today, voter suppression is the order of the day to try to keep us from being that deciding factor in voting.
Thank you, Judge Lang. That context is very helpful and essential, because apart sometimes you hear all these arguments about partisanship, but really the focus on what can engagement do to transform systems. Judge Lang, one other follow-up question. As we relate voting to the Constitution, what do we need to know about African Americans and the right to vote and the history of that?
Well, we fought a civil war to vote because the courts told us we had, as Black people, we had no path to citizenship. There was a man from Minnesota, at least he lived in Minnesota at Fort Snelling, named Dred Scott, who went before the US Supreme Court wanting a path as a man to citizenship in this country. And the Supreme Court told him that a Black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. And so we fought a civil war. That's where the abolitionists you talked about, the abolitionists came in and said, no, that's not going to be the way. The South declared war on their own country, the United States. And that's why we have all these Confederate statutes falling, because the scales are falling off their eyes and they're figuring out these are traitors to the United States that have all these statutes. And so we have a necessity to vote, to participate, and to stay on course and to have our issues matter. We are not tokens to be addressed at the last minute. Our issues are central to this country and always have been. And we have to insist that those who want our vote support the things that are important and that we matter, that Black lives matter, that Black health matters, that Black freedom from incarceration matters.
Brother Kevin, on that note, I'm going to turn to you. Why does voting matter in light of that history Judge Lang just provided for us?
Because Black people hold the keys to the kingdom, right? Like, so when we see our communities being over policed, right, and like even the stop and frisk laws and our communities being over policed, we are witnessing like one intentional tactic to be able to entrap as many Black and brown people in the system as possible by giving them this felon. It's like a form of voter suppression. By giving them this felon, we are going to completely disenfranchise a complete population of the community, right? So without us not having a vote, we continue to be powerless to the things that impact us. We continue to be like the last, the lost, and the least. And through the vote, we are able to have representation in these spaces of power. Who comes from where we come from and understands what needs to take place. But if we don't vote, then we don't have a voice in the conversation about us. Not voting is like watching two people talk about you, right? And they're about to make a decision on you, and you got anything to say, and you don't chime in, right? So voting is your way of chiming in into the conversation and the democracy in this country. And I know we all have something to say. Say it with your vote. Like Kevin Hart, say it with your chest. No, say it with your vote, right? Whatever you have to say. So it's important. This is one of the pathways to the future by continuing to transform the power structure in this country, so people in our community don't continue to see elected officials as them or they, but they can begin to see them as us, right? If our people, if we are able to organize and vote for people that has values in alignment with the community, then it's not this otherization and this disconnect between the power and the community. If people from the community are in those positions, then we begin to see it as us, and we begin to like share light on a whole nother generation of what could be possible for them, for our children, what's possible for their future. So we vote for the future of our children, and we want to change the narrative from them people to us. Because I don't really care about like them. A lot of us, the them, it's easier to disconnect from them, right? But when you hear us, right, you feel it. So vote for us. That's why.
Another great line that we can take with us of voting for us and not them. That brings us back to that conversation of, you know, allyship, being an abolitionist, being a community advocate, being a leader, that is really about that common goal of unity. And we know it from Camo J, unity in the community is essential. Right. It's essential. So we have a question here in the chat. What other things should we be doing to assure that others vote beyond getting them registered to vote? Some are registered and still may not vote. So basically the question is, if I'm registered, how do I get to that next step of voting? So that's a question that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier of how do I get beyond saying I'm going to get counted? And then Brother Kevin, you said, no, it's not just about getting counted. You have to take action. So how do we get folks to get registered and vote? And then it's that third phase that you talked about, Brother Kevin, taking action, because the action doesn't end at the ballot box. So what should we do? Brother Kevin, you want to lead us on this one?
How we do that is continue to create the infrastructure of, we must have more justice. So after we get registered to vote, we go vote. Now, what do? Now, how do we hold the people that we voted for accountable? And how we hold them accountable by continuing to stay active. And you are really able to hold them accountable when you are doing everything in your power, in your circle of influence to make a difference, right? So we need your vote. We need you in your circle of influence, making a difference. And then collectively, we can hold all of the people accountable that we voted for. And we can make sure that our vote is not free, right? Because freedom ain't free for us. Our vote comes with expectations. And expectations is making sure that we center the needs and the humanity of our people. So this is an ongoing battle, right? It can't stop at the ballot. It can't stop with just you being active. You need to make sure that you activate others, right? So this is how we do that. We continue to be active, activate others, be informed, inform others, and collectively build. This is what we have to do.
Thank you. Judge Lang, how was your vision of this? How would you help us to go forward? And after we register, then what's next?
I think being able to have carpools and drive people to the early voting centers, particularly in Minneapolis, we have some early voting centers that don't have the high density that you would have on election day at the polling place. So that these early voting centers, you can, from any part of the city, you can go together and vote and fill out your absentee ballot, get the proper signatures so on the outside, so your ballot is not thrown away in the trash and not counted because you missed a step. So these early voting centers make sure that everything is done and your vote is counted. Nobody is stealing your vote out of the mail or not delivering it on time. And so that's my suggestion, is to look at those early voting centers and get to those places and have your ballot on file.
Thank you, Judge Lang. So there's some opportunities here because we know in advance that there may be some barriers, whether it's related to long lines, inability to social distance. So in light of, and I'll just ask this question to you both, that sense of in light of the novel pandemic and COVID-19, what are some of the strategies just practically that people can use to make sure that they can register and vote successfully without some of the stress and temptation not to vote at all?
Well, it's important that we vote. A lot of this is designed to discourage us from voting. It's another form of voter suppression to create this fear that you may get sick going to the polls, or that it will take too long. And there's so many of people in our community are on hourly wage jobs and they can't wait 6 hours in line to vote. So that's why these early voting centers are not only open on the weekday, but they're opening them on the weekend so that people can get in there within 20 minutes and cast their ballot and get out. So spreading that word and providing transportation carpools so that people can get there is important. We as a community must wear masks. We must wear gloves. We have to do that now to go to Target, to go to any place of importance, Walmart, anything. So we just have to mask up, put our gloves on, keep our sanitizer, to do all the things to keep our franchise.
What I would say is, great question. Anybody on here who listening, let's think of some stuff that we can do actively, because this is so unprecedented times, us voting during a pandemic. What do we do? How do we physically do this? And I'm like interested in anyone who's thinking of some creative ways in which we can get to the ballot. Now, I know I'm thinking of, we should make sure that we back to relational organizing. Any of your people that you know who may be vulnerable, like to COVID-19, make sure that you check on them and try to create any pathway to make it easy as possible for them to vote. Make sure that we are looking out for our vulnerable people who want to be active. How can we create layers of protection around them and make sure that they have the space to be able to go and put their ballot in? And as an organizer, I'm down for some innovation. So like I had put my email in there earlier, I'm down for anyone to get at me and we can collectively together think about how do we do this in 2020? Because we're going to have to do this. And I want to hear from some others on this. How do we vote in a pandemic when we can't hug our grandmas? How do we go vote? So thanks for the question, Dr. Tyner. I ain't think about that one.
Yes, actually, it's a question. We have a very active audience here in the chat room. So the question came from our participants. So they're building the list, and I'm sure many of the folks that are here with us and listening and who will tune in will continue to generate some of those ideas, because it's of critical importance to not allow fear related to some of the challenges with the pandemic keep us from the ballot box. So what strategies work? I like what Judge Lang said. The traditional old school carpool, we saw that work in the bus boycotts. We need to bring it back today. So transportation is not an issue. And she was very clear, put that mask on, wear those gloves, clean your hands for that 20 seconds. So she gave us some very clear practical instructions as reminders to be able to still go through the process, but be precautionary and safe as possible. So thank you for that, Judge Lang. And please, if you have other ideas, I put the question out there, what are your recommendations? We all want to know. So Brother Kevin said he's willing to help you organize and be a part of it, but share those recommendations in the chat box as well. So as we look at this, in the grand scheme of things, oftentimes we talk about the person who's registered, getting them to vote, getting them to take action. What are some of the strategies? And I'll turn this one to you, Brother Kevin, to get us started on. What about the person who hasn't registered, doesn't believe that there's a need for them to vote, and there's not a connection to this idea that their vote counts and their voice matters? What do you tell them, Brother Kevin?
First, I ask them why, right? Because I know this is a trauma response. This is a person that's responding to something that they experienced. And I want to ask them why. And in their why is how I'll try to find the space to push them to, in this why, there are solutions that can empower you, right? And from these solutions that can empower you, you can empower others. And you can make sure that what took place with you can never take place with anyone else. So that would be the first place where I would want to connect with them and get to a place of empowerment, right? Understanding that actually this is something that will empower you. And give space to hear their trauma, to hear why they feel this way and this disconnect that exists between them. And then show them very concretely what their vote does and how their vote matters. And say, what is important to you? Find the things that's important to them, the things that's closest to their heart, the things that's closest to their homes, that's closest to them. And then you say, well, we have candidates who's running anti that, who are going to make these things worse. And we may have candidates who, in language, say that they are here to champion this, right? So you have an opportunity to join forces with someone with the energy around that's actively trying to dismantle the trauma that you're faced with, right? And give it to them as an opportunity to empower themselves and empower others, right? And if I know we don't like to get down with politics, but politics love to get down with us, right? So it's one of those things where we don't have a choice, right? It's really back to like vote or die. We don't have a choice to be silent in the conversation about the future of our children, because that's what it comes down to. So I want to relate to them, hear them, and move them forward from feeling powerless to powerful.
Let's recap that. Relate to them. You talked about asking the question of why they may not vote, why they're not interested in the political process. And then it seems like your second step is really about how do you connect them then to issues that are important to them. So it's a process of community organizing and community engagement through those informal contacts. So would you say, Brother Kevin, I need to get back to my phone on those contacts and start this conversation? You said the same thing about the census. What about voting? What would be my strategy?
Same way, holla at your folks, like get in there and talk to your people and say, all right, because as organized, we have a broad audience that we can reach and we can do mass organizing in that way. And that is an effective tool for some. Some can hear that. Us social justice warriors, we understand that language, we communicate in these mediums, and we are on this frequency of communication. But there is another frequency in our community who don't communicate on the same wavelength. So if you know any of these people that's in your contacts that may be falling through the crack and you have a personal relationship with them, then you reach out to them and invite them to the table. That's the importance of us being at the table to be able to create more seats at the table. And as you're going to the table, that's the conversation you have with them on the way to the table, right? This is a conversation of what happened, how, and I'm actually taking you to the table where we will have an opportunity to change the trauma that you are faced with. So yeah, you get in, participate in any mass organizing that you can possibly do, and any intermediate organizing that you can possibly do, and come bring it right back to your circle of influence and your contacts, and try to do as much as you possibly can to positively impact those spaces as well too.
Excellent. So Brother Kevin is telling us, get organized, get mobilized. Judge Lang, I'll turn to you just for another piece of that history lesson that you've been providing for us. As we think about voting, it comes to mind for me just some images as I was listening to Brother Kevin. I was thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer and her declaration of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. I still see the face of Congressman John Lewis and reminded of how bloodied and beaten he was as he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I was thinking about Medgar Evers a lot as his older brother Charles Evers recently passed away, how he was gunned down in his own driveway for the idea of voting. What should we think about as we think about the history and the context of voting? How do we share that story when we're doing what Brother Kevin talked about of going out and organizing?
Well, we are standing on the shoulders of generations of our ancestors who planted seeds in this country to make it the great country that it is. We have descended from slaves who fought in uniform in the Revolutionary War. They fought in every war this country's been in, even when they couldn't benefit from the rights that they were fighting for. And so this whole opportunity that we have to vote that was fought so hard for by our ancestors so that we could have a full portion of citizenship, we cannot fall short and give up the gains that our ancestors made and not exercise the franchise that they fought so hard for by feeling like that's not for us. It's the whole game. It's not just part of the game. Voting is the whole game. So being visible, having a voice, being able to stop abuse, it starts with voting.
Right, so you hear it. You hear from both Judge Lang and Brother Kevin the importance of voting, the importance of engagement, and they're just stressing that it starts with you and I, but that there was that sense of that movie that's dedicated to Dr. Ben Chavis of blood done signed my name, that there was bloodshed, there was sacrifice for us to get to where we are today. So in thinking about that, and please continue to share any additional questions, we'll be opening up for a live Q&A just shortly here. Thinking about all these pieces coming together, about voting, about the ballot box, about census, what do you think of the concept of, if you had to give the group a sense of, one, what does leadership mean to you related to civic engagement? And two, people have heard a lot of ideas. For some, it might be their first opportunity to learn about some of the themes that we talked about of mass incarceration, gerrymandering. We're all coming from different places. What's one leadership action that you would give folks to take away with them from everything that we discussed? So what does it mean to be a leader? And what's one leadership action we all can take? Judge Lang, would you like to get us started?
Okay.
Please.
Well, I think one of the things about being a leader and understanding the importance of voting is to understand how many different people are on the ballot. If you never vote, you don't understand that the judges who you may not approve of their decision, they're also on the ballot.
Yes.
The city council members who are running around crazy, they're on the ballot. So
Yes.
there's so many different people other than the president that are on the ballot that we control. Our sheriff, all these different resources are on the ballot. So they are accountable to the public. And so being able to exercise an informed vote is critical in so many different areas. And our, you know, as I've said before, our ancestors fought for this right. And we need to be able to control our own destiny. And part of that control is by voting.
Thank you. And here's just a tip for everyone as well. You can go to the ballot box and be prepared, because the Secretary of State has a free virtual tool that allows you to see the ballot in advance. Then you can do your research of the candidates, and then you can find your own information and see, as Brother Kevin talked about, who aligns with your values, who aligns with the issues that are important to you. And that's an excellent reminder, Judge Lang. Oftentimes we forget that judges are on the ballot. We forget city council is on the ballot. So sometimes we can get so lost in the national federal issues, and people only know the national and federal candidates. Please know your local candidates, because it's equally important of local and national engagement. So it's just something to think about, because we can't talk about criminal justice reform and you don't know the track record of the judges that are overseeing the criminal court calendar. So we have to be able to organize very strategically around these issues. And I also just want to add just one piece of food for thought before we go to Brother Kevin on this question about leadership and a leadership action. Please also, I didn't have the opportunity, I didn't know who he was, but I said I have to find out more about this man. Killer Mike from Atlanta. And I'm not endorsing his music. I've never heard of one of his songs. I know he's a rap artist, and a great, okay, and an entrepreneur. So I still need to listen to his music. But what I can tell you, he said something that radically transformed the way that I see census and voting and all these issues. He said one of the things that we all have to do as a community is come up with our list of demands. So what issues are of importance? How do we have a common message? Because I grew up in the church choir. My grandmother was a powerful and a beautiful soprano singer. I can't sing at all. I did the Milli Vanilli my whole life, but she took me on all those revivals and crusades, and I just moved my lips, you know. But I say this because we have to become one choir with many voices and in harmony on the same hymnal. Sometimes I go out and I hear people talking about voting, about census and civic engagement. I mean, I'm on hymnal 129 with Judge Lang and Brother Kevin, and you're on 152. We have to get aligned and start singing the same message. So I was very grateful when Killer Mike made that statement about being clear about our demands. So as a leader, I would say my leadership action is making sure we have clarity on what does the world look like that we envision, and what steps do we need to take to build it? Those are policy questions. So Brother Kevin, help us out here. What does it look like for you about leadership and our leadership action?
So I've been coming back to this thing I've been calling relational organizing, which, relationships. So one of the things that's most important to me is relationships, us, back to us. So for me, my leadership style is like, get engaged with community, go build relationships amongst ourselves and be in space and in communication and likewise energy with people from the community, one, you won't feel as alone, because a lot of the times, you know, we are meant to, our trauma is isolated and it's very individualized, but through relationships, you will actually understand that, oh, this is not just impacting me, this is impacting a lot of the people that I know. There is power, right, in that collectiveness of understanding that, hey, oh, if this is impacting all of us, then collectively, we can actually do something to change this. And through the vote is one way that you can do that, right? So as a leader, I think what's most important is so great is what you're saying, Dr. Tyner, is we have to have collective movements, right? Where our movements can no longer be isolated, right? And create these barriers between ourselves and our community. And I know it's difficult because the trauma and white supremacy has done such a number on the psyche and the mental and emotional state, like economically, in our communities. But guess what? All of us who exist in this moment, it is our duty to do all that we can to fight back and transform that so we don't pass that trauma on to the next generation. It's going to be tough, but each generation had their fight. And we got a lot on our hands, but this is one, the importance of collectiveness and the power of relationships, right? So as a leader, I would tell everyone to go make reconciliation with anyone in your family, friends, or in your network that you may be out of touch with for whatever reasons. Now is the time to reach out and begin to bring people back together and begin building something collective, because until we are all free, none of us are, you can't be free alone, because if you're free alone, they're gonna come get you again, right? There's not enough protection for you there if you like free alone on the island. Freedom has to be a collective effort. So for me, my leadership style is I would like to see the collectiveness of our people to come together to understand how can we leverage all of our collective power for the liberation of our people. It is the answer. The vote is one way, right? Then we understand the power that we have for the vote. Then we understand the power of continuing to develop future elected officials, where these people continue to be seeds from our communities, where people that from outside of our communities is no longer sitting in the city council seat that impacts the community. They're not even from the community. So we need to continue to like raise up leaders from the community to make sure that they are the ones that's advocating. And I believe in doing that through relationship building. We need each other, y'all. We need each other.
So it's very clear then from both Brother Kevin and Judge Lang, it's going to take those relationships. It's going to take getting to your contact list, engaging folks. Remember the data that I read about the groups that are undercounted, making sure that the children are counted, making sure that the homeless are counted. So we'll have to have some real strategies to make sure everyone's voice is included and accounted for, not just for the census, not just for voting, but for both and civic engagement as a whole. So what I'm really hearing from both of you, this is a process. For some of us, we're just beginning. For others, we've been on this trajectory for a long time, but no matter where we are, the question is, how will you engage? And back to Brother Kevin's earlier point, also what seeds are we planting for the harvest for our children's children? How are we building and making democracy, making community really come alive in some unique ways? So before we turn to a live engagement with some questions directly from our listening and participating audience, there's just a few reminders that I want to make sure that I give around dates and around information as well. That way, when we're going out, as Brother Kevin told us to get out, and he told us, even if you're not reconciled with someone, you make sure that you build a bridge and connect with everybody that you know. Is that right, Brother Kevin?
It's time.
Yeah, it's time. Okay.
It's bigger than all of us.
Yes. So we have to get organized together collectively. So we have that reminder. So here's a few things. Number one, census is a matter of equity. Judge Lang was able to provide that context for us. We want to make sure that our communities have the resources that they need, not just for some communities, depending on your zip code or where you live, but for everyone. So make sure that you're filling out that form honestly. And I know Brother Kevin mentioned that sometimes, you know, at Big Mama's house, there's other people who live there that might not be on the lease, may not be accounted for. That's not the issue for the census. The issue right now for the census is who's in that household. So don't have fear about listing who lives in that household. And when we think about equity, remember this. Equity as it relates to the census is about how money is distributed in our community. And we know that we live in a capitalistic society. Money equals power, money equals privilege, money equals access. Number two, remember that the census does not identify individuals or your families. It's a collective number. So they're not asking, does Kevin Reese, Judge Lejeune Lang live in my household? They're just asking for the specific numbers. And Brother Kevin mentioned this earlier. Remember, confidentiality is against the law for any person to violate the privacy of the census data. And if you don't think it's serious, it can land someone in jail up to 5 years and a $250,000 fine. Last but not least, the census data is provided by those who fill out the data questionnaire. So we're thinking about the data. A part of this that oftentimes is not discussed, and I actually was looking at this data for a research project that I was working on, is that the census will also give us a sense that the demographic shift that I predicted early as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional has already happened. When I first got on the stage 20 years ago advocating for the future of DEI work, I said by 2060, you will no longer have an ethnic majority. That's how fast the cultural demographics were changing. 10 years ago, I said by 2050, we know that where we sit today, the vast majority of new births are what? Children of color. So really by 2043, America will no longer have an ethnic majority. Remember, I said I was an English major. What in the world will we do with our language? I mean, I was reading one report and they said like 1,000 times the majority minority population came to this place. And finally, I just said, the report's giving me a headache. Who are you talking about? So think about our language. Will we even have use of terms like majority and minority? What will it really mean? And in the context of everything that we're talking about, we also know that that's a fear for many people. If we look at our census data from the last census, we know that actually if we look at the population growth, the fastest population growth is in the Hispanic community, a growth rate of 43%. While if you look at Caucasian or white Americans, there's a growth rate of 6%. So when we look at these changing demographics, this should be for opportunity for us to celebrate that America is truly America in the sense that all these cultures are coming together. So the census matters. And if we know everything that you just heard today and people are undercounted, that number in 2043 of no longer having an ethnic majority, we might, for all we know, already be there today in 2020. So it's just things that we need to think about what this data means, how it shapes the narrative. 2 dates for voters. We're going to go for voting really quick here. First of all, you can request an absentee ballot. Yours truly did it, just received it today. That was less than 3 days that I have my ballot in my hand. But remember that advice from Judge Lang. Please read that green sheet of paper and follow the instructions. Complete the ballot, put it in the envelope, and have a witness sign it, seal it, and send it. There's some steps, my friends. Please don't miss the steps. And that's also, I know in light of the pandemic, a lot of people are saying, I'm staying at home. They don't move from home. So if that's the case, there is still a healthy choice to use absentee voting. Remember that you have to make sure your absentee ballot is postmarked by election day. If you're talking about local elections, by August 11, 2020. Or you can also bring it to one of the drop-off locations. And don't forget November 3rd is the general election day. And remember that reminder, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, see the ballot, research your candidates, and learn more. So I want to conclude with thanking Judge Lang, thanking Brother Kevin for sharing this knowledge and insight. I'll open it up and Majesty will assist me. If you have any live questions, feel free to jump in. But in the meantime, before we transition into the live questions, we want to thank Ramsey County for partnering with us to get this information out. We want to let you know that there are free resources on our Facebook page of Planting People Growing Justice, things that you can share about the census, little infographics, little pictures, things when you're calling those folks in your contact list, you have some talking points. Those are free. You can download them and use them. But before we transition to the final Q&A portion, I'd like for both Judge Lang and Brother Kevin, if you'd be willing to introduce your organizations and tell us about how we can get involved, because both of you are those key torchbearers, those drum majors that are helping to set the tone for the future of our nation and the future of the world. And we want to know a little bit about what you do, how we can get involved. And remember that question earlier about allyship. How do we support? And what's that plan to be those abolitionists as well? So we want to start with you, Judge Lang. Tell us more about ILI and how we can get involved.
The International Leadership Institute is a multi-generational volunteer organization that forms partnerships with people and nations in transition. We go to work only by invitation on various subjects. One of the things we're pursuing now, which is in the hearts and minds of many, many people, is police accountability. We are analyzing every law, state, local, and federal that impact the police department and police departments across the country. So we welcome volunteers. We work both in South America, in Brazil, in Kenya, in East Africa, in long-term partnerships to fix identified problems alongside local leaders. We don't replace the local brilliance that's in any location, whether it's our community or internationally, but we work to leverage the minds and the resources of the local community. And so president at internationalleadership.org is where you would reach us, or you can go on our website, internationalleadership.org.
Excellent. I don't know about you, but I'm excited every time I hear about Judge Lang and the work that she's doing to get involved. So here's your opportunity to learn, grow, and commit as a leader. So please do follow the International Leadership Institute. You can also follow them on social media to learn more about how you can get involved and make a difference locally and globally. So thank you, Judge Lang. We appreciate your leadership. Brother Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization as well.
So thank you again for the question. I had talked a little bit about it earlier. So until we are all free, right now during this time of great unrest and during this pandemic, I just got a call this morning from one of the brothers in Stillwater that 3 officers was confirmed that they had COVID-19. This was just yesterday. So that like the needs and the immediacy of like their actual bodies and lives are on the line. So what I'm doing out here, I'm trying to support as many of the brothers and sisters who are inside of the walls with making sure that they have the supplies that they need, because you have to go to the chow hall. Inside of prison, the chow hall is probably everything that COVID-19 practices tell you that you shouldn't do. That's what a prison chow hall is, right? People have to use the phone. They're not working inside of there, so they don't have money to be able to call their families, and even not only for their families to hear from them, but to check on their families. They have to call Big Mama and their aunties and their family members to be able to see how was the family doing, because all of they're getting inside of there is the numbers of the deaths of COVID-19 every day, right? So every day they're calling to make sure that that wasn't one of their family members, right? So that's the support that I'm trying to give to the brothers and sisters who are on the inside, making sure our brothers and sisters inside of there have the supplies and the resources that they need to be able to persevere during these tough times during COVID. Also, I'm working on like 12 freedom campaigns with the brothers and sisters who are inside of there. Some of them are innocent. Some of them have been overly sentenced. Some of them are on their way home and trying to think about what does their reentry process look like. So I need support with helping brothers find housing, employment, mental health, education, anything that can be supportive of someone coming out of that space and transitioning back into the community and giving themselves a chance, right? So I do this work through until we are all free. So if you want to support this in any way, I put my email in the chat box, or you can follow us on Until We Are All Free at Facebook, or Until We Are All Free on Instagram, or you can visit our website with uwaaf.com and learn more about what we do. But the needs are so many. I need help, y'all. I love the brothers and sisters, but it's so many. I take some days I take 20 calls from men and women inside of prison, and all of their needs are different, whatever that looks like. But it's a generation of them that God has planted me on this side of the garden, and and I'm doing all that I can to champion for them. So supporting until we all free is supporting the work that I'm doing on the ground to support our brothers and sisters who are still incarcerated inside of these correctional facilities.
Okay, so we definitely see then that there's work to do. You heard the plea from Brother Kevin. There's practical things that we all can do. So take inventory of how you can help, whether it's housing, educational materials, or something that I think we oftentimes forget and take for granted. Make sure that you open up your network to other people. Make sure that you're thinking about, you know, especially even post-COVID, social distance, if within COVID, how are you building new bridges and expanding your network in ways that you never thought about? How are you reaching out to be your brothers or sisters keeper in a meaningful way? But without further ado, we're gonna open it up for a general live questions Q&A. We can see that you're all here. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask live for our esteemed panelists? So please do join in and just make sure that it's related to something that you heard, related to the census, related to voting. We want to hear from you. We can see you, but we want to hear from you. So who'd like to go first?
Oh, just 1 minute. I guess related to mail voting, I was wondering if Judge Lang had concerns if we feel like we might lose voters between the push for mail-in voting versus voting at the site. What are some of your thoughts about that?
I think mail-in voting is a great idea. What you don't want to do is turn in your ballot at the last minute or to miss the steps that are required on the ballot for that witness signature. And so don't wait until the last day to turn in your ballot, because then there may be a problem with getting the postmark and having your ballot count. So do it early. But mail-in is a very good system. It just has to be done early.
Do we think the information is getting out to people? I mean, I know mail-in, like Dr. Tyner mentioned, I've gotten mine, husband. Do we think that there's been enough notification? I know the voting offices have been sending that out. Do you feel that people are receiving the information, the opportunity, and comfortable with the mail-in?
I think a lot of information, people are being bombarded with a lot of information, so we need to keep repeating these options so that people can act on them in time.
And please feel free. Like I said, there's plenty of resources that are available on the Planting People Growing Justice website. You can just click share. That could be one of the ways that you help to get the information out. And remind people, to Judge Lang's point, remind people long before August 11th. My reminders, so I was ready for that relationship organizing, Brother Kevin. My reminders are on my calendar starting August 1st to say, okay, are you ready? So ahead of time, sending those reminders and engaging. Brother Kevin, any other advice that you have for Dr. Chapman on this question? How do we make sure people complete the process?
Understand that in order for us to all exist in this moment, there were people that completed the process. There were people that ran through swamps, that persevered. So I know the process may be tedious at times and it may seem hard, but we are literally doing this for the future of our children. So we just have to persevere. And as my grandma was to say, we got to wade in the water, but we have to do it. Not doing it is literally not a choice. There were too many people that sacrificed for me to be here today, for me to not complete some paperwork. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other advice? Any other questions that you have for our panelists? Well, I don't mind jumping in. So I'll give a question that I'll allow just a couple more seconds if somebody else would like to jump in. looking at all the issues and everything that we're referring to, what gives you hope? Because I'll tell you just a personal little story. I was out at the Twin Cities Book Festival. So first of all, I was excited. It was my first big book signing. So I was ecstatic. That was 4 years ago. So I was just happy because my brother took me. We were passing the state fair. We didn't even know what it was. And he said, oh, one day you'll be here. And I'm thinking, I haven't even written a book. So I thought, okay, so that's that faith and hope, you know, that ancestral spirit that many of us bring with us. So I want to know what keeps you hopeful in the midst of all this? Because I was so happy to be here and there, and a gentleman said, why are you smiling? And I remember at first it was like, you smile because I'm blessed to be alive, blessed to be here. But I have to tell you, on many occasions, I've heard the same response. Why are you hopeful? Why are you smiling? Where does your faith come from? And in fact, one gentleman told me, you even have a Kool-Aid smile. I said, I might have to trademark that. Sell some cold beverages.
Yeah, no doubt.
That question for you. What's a source of faith and hope as we go on this journey? 2020 census, voting 2020. What's your source of inspiration?
I know for me, it's people. So to hear you say that before you wrote a book is someone who read your book while I was in a cell, and how much it meant to me, Dr. Tyner, that that's the things that I find hopeful. So I have been home close to a year. Dr. Tyner done sent me love through students and all kind of people. And what I get hope from is I see one day a messenger, Dr. Artika Tyner, calling me, and the relationships and the community and the beautiful people that I know, the people that have invested in me, and the people that I see that put their lives and their bodies on the line every day in the name of justice for our people. That's the thing that keep me hopeful, to say that I actually thank God every day that he chose me to exist in this moment with the people that I know. So I find hope in the people that I exist with, and the people that I come from, and the future that I know that we can all have. So I feel the same way, Dr. Tyner. I be smiling every day. I was at one of they maced me, I was still smiling, right? My grandma prayed for me. My grandmother's prayers still protect me. And I just know so many amazing spirits that it'd be really, 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 really hard for them to take my smile away, despite it all. So it's the people, relationships.
Judge Lane, what gives you that hope?
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And
Amen.
without the protection of Jesus, we wouldn't, as a people, be here. Every effort has been used to try to stop us or kill us or incarcerate us. But the Lord keeps opening the doors that are closed in our face, generation after generation. And so having the knowledge that both my son and my daughter are registered voters and recognize the importance of voting, that the generations that come after me will be taught by them the importance of voting and being persistent as our generations have been throughout time, it gives me hope.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is the perfect note to conclude on. But this is not a conclusion, it's only the beginning. You have the contact information now for Brother Kevin, Judge Lang, for our organization, so you can remain connected, because it's of critical importance to be informed and engaged to be able to do this work collectively. We also have a recording. That way we'll just upload the link after this, after we conclude today. And I'm so happy, looks like we got the world joined in. I just seen Ghana is here with us as well. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are excited.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we know that it's a global effort, so we're happy to see everyone here. So this is only the beginning. This doesn't conclude the conversation. We will be hosting and more events as well. Our organizational mission focuses on civic engagement, leadership development. So you will have more information available online as well. And it looks like I just got another message. Nigeria's in the house too. So we are happy
in the house.
we are excited
brothers and sisters.
To see the world represented here, because we know that we're united in one struggle. No matter how much melanin we have in our skin or where we come from, We're united in the struggle for justice and freedom for all. So in the words of Brother Kevin, until we all are free. And I'll conclude with something that really touched me as Judge Lang was speaking, of thinking about that ancestral spirit. And I'll conclude with the words of Dr. Maya Angelou in her poem, Grandmothers. I read it at my late grandmother's memorial service. And it's a reminder. She talks about, I come as one, but stand as 10,000. I come as one, but stand as 10,000. So that means that wherever you are, whatever you're doing as your work as a leader, you may come as one, but you stand as 10,000. That we come through a labor of love to continue the work, to make an impact in the fight for freedom and justice for all. So welcome, my friends from the local community in Minnesota. Welcome nationally, our friends and brothers and sisters in West Africa. We appreciate you, and we know that together we'll be able to impact change. So we thank you. Let's give a round of applause to Brother Kevin, Judge Lang. Yes. So a perfect conclusion to a wonderful Saturday to continue to work together. So we thank you, and we look forward to connecting again. So
Peace and blessings to y'all, Such an
Yes.
honor to hold space with y'all. Such an honor.
And thank you so much, Dr. Tyner and Kevin.
For sure. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we'll post the recording so you can share it with your family and friends.
I'm finna go get active, y'all. So if y'all looking for me, I'll be somewhere active.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you
All
for
right.
doing this, Dr. Tyner.
For sure. Peace and blessings.
All right, bye-bye.